The epicenter of the epidemic, once again, New York City. And the new mayor, Eric Adams, was sworn in from Times Square at the first moments of New Year's. He gave his inaugural address at noon.
I chose Times Square as the site of my swearing in because I take this important office as a time of great challenges for our city. Despite COVID-19 and its persistence, New York is not closed. It is still open and alive because New Yorkers are more resilient than the pandemic.
And Mayor Adams joins us now. Mayor, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good, George. Good to see you.
I know you were planning on riding a city bike in. Is that how you got here?
Yes, I did. And I enjoyed the ride.
I'm glad you did. Let's talk about the challenges ahead for you right now. I know you said you wanted New York to be the center of the universe, not the center of the epidemic right now. Are you confident you can follow through on your pledge to keep the city up and running despite this surge in cases?
Well, COVID is a formidable opponent, and it continues to evolve. And we must pivot and evolve with it. But you can't do it viewing yourself from in the crisis. We have to see ourselves past the crisis. If we close down our city, it is as dangerous as COVID. That's what our focus must be. So that proper balance of safety, keeping our economy operating is going to allow us to get through this.
Nobody wants to close down, but right now the city's operating pretty much at half speed, according to the New York Times. Subway lines are closed. We have staffing shortages of fire and police. Testing centers are short on staff as well. How do we get back to normal? Can we get back to normal with all these shortages?
Well, you said something very interesting. Subway lines are closed, not the subway system. I took the train in on Saturday. So we are pivoting based on where the urgency is located. This is smart the way we're doing it. We're not taking a one-size-fits-all. We're thinking about it, making the right moves and decisions. I was with my police commissioner yesterday. We have about a 20% sick rate, but now we have officers coming back after the 5 days. So we're doing an amazing job of shifting the way the virus is causing us to do so.
New York's at the epicenter right now. How close are we to the peak?
Don't know that. If I knew that, I'd be a billionaire. You know, I'm unclear, but we can't live through variants. We spent $11 trillion on COVID, and we don't have another $11 trillion. So our lives can't be based on what's the new variant. No, we have to figure out how do we adjust. And I say to those who are not vaccinated, stop it. It's time to get vaccinated. It's time to have the booster shots. You're endangering yourselves, and you're endangering the public and your family as well.
New York City schools are going to open this week. Talk to parents about what they can expect. What do you say to those parents who fear sending their children back?
I say to them, fear not sending them back. The stats are clear. The safest place for children is inside a school. The numbers of transmissions are low. Your children is in a safe space to learn and continue to thrive. We lost almost 2 years of education. George, we can't do it again. And so I say to them, we're going to create a safe environment with testing. We're going to identify the children that are exposed. We're going to remove them from that environment. The numbers show the mere fact that a child is exposed in a classroom does not mean that an entire classroom is exposed. We just have to be smarter and thoughtful to keep our cities safe and operating.
Some cities like Boston are requiring tests before the students go back. Why not do that?
It's a good idea. And I believe that the governor has the power to do mandatory testing, and I'm going to operate within the tools that I have available to me. And I think that would be a great idea, but unfortunately the governor made the decision, and I'm going to follow the governor. We're going to be partners on this to make sure we make our school system safe.
You're keeping Mayor de Blasio's vaccine mandate in place for private employers. Will you require teachers, police officers, other city workers to get a booster shot?
That's our next move and decision. We're going to examine the numbers. If we feel we have to get to the place of making that mandatory, we're going to do that. But we're encouraging them to do it now. I took my booster shots, and every time I look at the numbers, I'm happy. And you know what the message is also, George? It's not only about is it going to prevent you from getting COVID? Because that's what people are saying. I got it and I have my booster shot. No, it's going to prevent you from dying. It's going to alleviate the possibility of you being hospitalized, going on a ventilator. The goal is to build up your immune system, and the booster shot is going to do that. The numbers are clear. Look at those who are not vaccinated, they're sky high. Numbers who are, they are at a moderate level. That's what we must focus on.
Your number one challenge during the campaign, your number one message during the campaign was to get crime under control. That was your number one promised 500 murders in New York City in the last year. And the challenge you faced was pretty apparent on your first day. What, you had to make a 911 call from the subway over a fight. You had to pay a visit to a police officer who was shot. That's the personal touch. But what's the plan?
Oh, we have a good plan. We have a good police commissioner. She's in now doing a real analysis to have the right balance, because the balance is not just heavy-handed policing. It's public safety and justice. What we do long-term and what we do right now. We're going to go after gangs. We're going to take down some of the large gangs in our city. Whenever you see a shooting take place, look at the next line, gang-related. We're going to zero in on gangs. We're going to reinstitute a plainclothes anti-gun unit and zero in on those guns. The other 2 days ago, we took 7 guns off the street in the Bronx with an amazing team of officers there. And so we're going to refocus on those who are carrying guns and violent crimes in our city and turn around this city. It's going to be a safe place. I say all the time, the prerequisite to prosperity is public safety and justice. My city is going to be safe.
Let's talk about prosperity. The economy is a challenge as well. 9.4% unemployment. That is double the national average.
Yes, yes. And we have to get New Yorkers working again. How do we do that? By stop having an antagonistic relationship with our business community. I've been meeting with top business leaders and making our city attractive to do business in. This is a difficult city to do business. Then we're going to create a centralized database of job applications. All those who are looking for a job, they're going to know where to go to fill out a standard application, partner with our businesses, and they're going to list all the jobs they have available. We could identify the training that's needed. How do we move people into middle-class jobs and then become a good place to be the center of life sciences, technology, self-driving cars, drone development, and yes, even Bitcoin and blockchain.
You've been on the job not quite 36 hours. Learn anything new yet?
Yes, that this is an amazing city, you know, riding the city bike in, taking the train in, interacting with New Yorkers. Generals don't lead their troops from the back. They lead their troops from the front. I'm going to lead my city into this victory from the front. And people tell me this is a difficult job. Darn it, I want it to be a difficult job. You know, it's a difficult job being a cop, riding the subway trains in the 80s. It's going to be difficult now, but we are resilient. We're going to get through this, and we're going to look back on this and see why we are Americans in the first place, because we're a great country.
It's quite a bike riding outfit. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, George.
We're joined now by the chair of the January 6th committee, Benny Thompson, and Vice Chair Liz Cheney. Chairman Thompson, let me begin with you. You've been going at this for the better part of a year. What are your most consequential findings so far?
Well, I think obviously what occurred on January 6th was definitely a dark day for our country. Our challenge is to get to the facts and circumstances that created it. We're in the process of interviewing witnesses, taking depositions, and clearly we have uncovered some things that cause us real concern. Things like people trying to thwart the will of the people to make sure that government by the people would not be served, and basically, for the most part, undermine the integrity of our democracy. So we found some of those things. We're in the process of documenting it. We're getting volumes of material. We're talking to witnesses. But I can assure you what we have seen causes us real harm. I can't say a lot about it right now.
What can you say about what kind of specifics? What kind of specifics can you give us about what you found? What concerns you the most?
Well, that it appeared to be a coordinated effort on the part of a number of people to undermine the election of last November. The reason I say that is it could be people in the executive branch, could be people in the Department of Defense, some state characters, some nonprofits, and some very wealthy individuals who wanted to try to finance this undermining of our democracy. And what people saw on January 6th with their own eyes was not just something created at one moment. It was clearly what we believe, based on the information we've been able to gather, a coordinated activity on the part of a lot of people.
Any evidence that you've come across that some of your fellow members of Congress may be culpable?
Well, we're in the process of getting to that. As you know, we've asked 2 members of Congress to voluntarily come before our committee. We will probably be asking some more to come. Former member and chief of staff of former President Donald Trump gave us over 9,000 pages of documents we've been going through. We're looking at what occurred on January 6th, more specifically in those documents. There's communication between some of those members and the White House, especially asking Chief of Staff Meadows to get the president to call off this riot or insurrection. So there's some involvement. We just want to make sure we get to the bottom of it, and we produce a report that can be viewed with integrity and accuracy by the American people.
What more can you do besides issue a report? How do you hold those responsible accountable?
Well, you know, that's really up to the Department of Justice. Our charge is to get to the facts and circumstances of what occurred on January 6th. We'll do that. In addition to that, we'll make some recommendations in terms of legislation to hopefully, if adopted, this will never, ever happen again. I've been a member of Congress.
What kind of legislation could prevent that?
Well, the first legislation would be the coordination of resources to protect the Capitol. There were significant inconsistencies in coordination. The National Guard from the District of Columbia was slow to respond, not on its own, but they had to go to the Department of Defense. We have actually fixed that right now, where the mayor of the District of Columbia can access the Guard right now. In addition to that, our intelligence gathering components. As you know, it was clear that we were not apprised that something would happen. But for the most part, it was the worst kept secret in America that people were coming to Washington, and the potential for coordination and what we saw was there. So we want to make sure that never happens again. In addition to that, we want to make sure that the line of communication between the Capitol Police and the structure of how we make decisions is clear. Right now, it's kind of a hybrid authority, and that authority clearly broke down the training components for our Capitol Police. A lot of things that we don't have right now, but our work product will recommend some of those things based on our investigation.
Finally, sir, several legal experts have suggested it would be counterproductive for your committee to make criminal referrals. Is that still on the table?
Well, to be honest with you, as a member of Congress, we all take an oath of office. And part of that is in the pursuit of doing our day-to-day activities. If we find something that is irregular or illegal, we're obligated to report it. So I would say, for the sake of our committee, if in the course of our review we find something that we think warrant review or recommendation to the Department of Defense, Department of Judiciary, Justice, to be honest with you, we'll do it. We are not looking for it, but if we find it, we'll absolutely make the referral.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time this morning. And we're joined now by the Vice Chair of the committee, Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Congresswoman Cheney, thank you for joining us again this morning. Happy New Year to you. You know, you were alarmed by this from the very start, from the first moments on January 6th when this started to unfold. You've cut a lonely path in your party. Have you been surprised by anything you found over the last year?
Well, I've certainly been surprised by many things. I think that in the piece that you played by John Carl just a few moments ago, he touched on the fact that we know now, we are learning much more about what former President Trump was doing while the violent assault was underway. The committee has firsthand testimony now that he was sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office watching the attack on television. as the assault on the Capitol occurred. We know, as you know well, that the briefing room at the White House is just a mere few steps from the Oval Office. The president could have at any moment walked those very few steps into the briefing room, gone on live television, and told his supporters who were assaulting the Capitol to stop. He could have told them to stand down. He could have told them to go home. And he failed to do so. It's hard to imagine a more significant, a more serious dereliction of duty than that.
Is his failure to make that statement criminal negligence?
You know, I think that there are a number of, as the chairman said, potential criminal statutes at issue here. But I think that there's absolutely no question that it was a dereliction of duty. And I think one of the things the committee needs to look at as we're looking at a legislative purpose is whether we need enhanced penalties for that kind of dereliction of duty. But I think it's also important for the American people to understand how dangerous Donald Trump was. We know as he was sitting there in the dining room next to the Oval Office, members of his staff were pleading with him to go on television, to tell people to stop. We know Leader McCarthy was pleading with him to do that. We know members of his family. We know his daughter. We have firsthand testimony that his daughter Ivanka went in at least twice to ask him to please stop this violence. Any man who would not do so, any man who would provoke a violent assault on the Capitol to stop the counting of electoral votes, any man who would watch television as police officers were being beaten, as his supporters were invading the Capitol of the United States, is clearly unfit for future office, clearly can never be anywhere near the Oval Office ever again.
Hillary Clinton said a couple of weeks ago that if he runs and wins, that could be the end of our democracy. Do you share that fear?
I do. I think it is critically important, given everything we know about the lines that he was willing to cross. He crossed lines no American president has ever crossed before. You know, we entrust the survival of our republic into the hands of the chief executive. And when a president refuses to tell the mob to stop, when he refuses to defend any of the coordinate branches of government, he cannot be trusted. And we watched what this president did from throughout the election, the lies that he told, the extent to which he went to war with the rule of law. He completely ignored the rulings of over 60 courts, including judges he had appointed, and refused to send help, refused to tell people to stand down for multiple hours while that attack was underway.
You're about as stalwart a Republican as I've ever met. You come from a long line of Republicans as well. Of course, your father served in the White House. Your mother served in administrations as well. How do you explain, given your belief, your views, and your background, why a majority of Republicans today would re-elect Donald Trump?
Look, I think that we're in a situation as a nation where I certainly have very strong disagreements with the policies of the Biden administration. I think that the policies that President Biden has adopted are the wrong ones for this country. I think we need conservative, principled leadership. But the Republican Party has to make a choice. We can either be loyal to our Constitution or loyal to Donald Trump, but we cannot be both. And the nation needs a Republican Party that is based on substance and values and principles. And we've got to get back to that if we want to get this nation back on track. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, we can't be a party that's based on lies. We've got to be based on a foundation of truth and fidelity to the rule of law. And in my view, the most conservative of conservative principles is fidelity to the Constitution.
As we approach this anniversary, partisan views seem to be hardening. Do you have any evidence, do you have hope that your report can actually change some minds?
You know, this committee gives me hope, George. I think that the way that the Select Committee is working is nonpartisan. It is very much one that brings together a group of us who have very different policy views, but who come together when the issues have to do with the defense of the Constitution. And so that does give me hope. And I also think the American people are looking for serious leadership. They're looking for people certainly on both sides of the aisle who are going to dedicate themselves to policy and substance and engage in the debates that we need for the health of the nation and get away from the kind of vitriol that we are seeing too frequently, too often, frankly, on both sides. But as Republicans, we have a particular duty to reject insurrection, to reject what happened on January 6th, and to make sure that Donald Trump is not our nominee and that he's never anywhere close to the reins of power ever again.
Congresswoman Cheney, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, George.
As we come on the air this Christmas weekend, there are signs of the holiday spirit almost everywhere. In New York, the tree is up in Rockefeller Center, and preparations are underway for New Year's in Times Square. Supply chain disruptions didn't keep Santa's helpers from getting their job done. Despite those dire predictions, store shelves, for the most part, have been stocked. And we've learned Americans have been particularly generous this giving season, with charitable donations up nearly 10% compared to last year. COVID couldn't stop Christmas, but here we are again, yet another holiday season overshadowed by the pandemic that just won't go away. This time with the fear things may actually be getting worse. Omicron is sweeping the country, becoming the dominant COVID strain in just a matter of days, smashing hopes for a return to normal anytime soon. President Biden came into office vowing to get the pandemic under control. Now he is outlining yet another strategy, this time to combat Omicron. He said the federal government will distribute 500 million free at-home test kits starting in January and dispatch 1,000 military medical personnel to help overburden hospitals. He will also create vaccination and testing sites. While much of this will take time to implement, Biden issued an immediate plea to unvaccinated Americans.
Get vaccinated now. It's free. It's convenient. I promise you, it saves lives. And I honest to God believe it's your patriotic duty.
And we begin this morning with the president's chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci, thank you for joining us. We just heard the details of the president's latest strategy to deal with the pandemic. Let me just ask you, bottom line, what in what he announced is going to help deal with the immediate crisis, this rapid spread of Omicron?
Well, there are a few things. The one that would be immediate is to make sure, given the rapid spread of this extraordinary variant, that we don't get an overrun on hospitals, particularly in those regions in which you have a larger proportion of unvaccinated individuals. We want to make sure that, given the sheer volume of number of cases that you see now every day, it goes up and up. The last weekly average was about 150,000, and it likely will go much higher. The president's multi-part component of the response is to make sure that we have adequate backup for hospitals with military personnel, doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers, making sure that there's enough PPE and that, if needed, there's enough ventilators in the national strategic stockpile. Those are the things that are immediate. Obviously, testing, John, is going to be very important, that we get a greater capability of testing, particularly when the demand for testing is so high, where the combination of the Omicron variant itself, as well as the holiday season, where people want to get that extra level of assuredness that they're protected, even if you are vaccinated and boosted. One of the problems is that that's not going to be totally available to everyone until we get to January, and there are still some issues now of people having trouble getting tested. But we're addressing the testing problem, and that very soon that will be corrected.
So the president seemed to me to be quite defensive when he was asked about that, particularly when David Muir asked him about the testing issue. He said that this has not been a failure. But I mean, I've been asking questions about testing so often with you standing with the others at the podium since the beginning of the pandemic. Testing was a colossal failure in the early days, and why is it that now, nearly 2 years in, we still don't have affordable tests widely available to anybody who needs it? I mean, this must frustrate you, I imagine, as well.
Well, obviously it does, John. I mean, even with the amount, if you look at the beginning of the administration, the beginning of the year, there were essentially no rapid point-of-care home tests available. Now there are over 9 of them and more coming. The production of them has been rapidly upscaled, and yet because of the demand that we have, which in some respects, John, is good, that we have a high demand because we should be using testing much more extensively than we have, even in a situation where you have people who are vaccinated or boosted. But the situation where you have such a high demand, a conflation of events, Omicron stirring people to get appropriately concerned and wanting to get tested, as well as the fact of the run on tests during the holiday season. We've obviously got to do better. I mean, I think things will improve greatly as we get into January, but that doesn't help us today and tomorrow. So you're right, that is something that is of concern.
So in terms of Omicron, we know how wildly contagious it is. But what is your sense about what do we really know about how sick people are getting from this? As you know, there was data out of South Africa that suggested that it was less than 2% of those that were infected were hospitalized. That compared with about 20% that had been hospitalized under the Delta wave. That, by the way, is a country that doesn't have anywhere near the kind of vaccination level that we have. And we saw some indications out of England, too, that it seemed to be less severe. Are you comfortable now in saying that Omicron is wildly contagious but not as severe a disease?
Well, there's one thing that's for sure that we all agree upon, that it is extraordinarily contagious. It's just outstripped even the most contagious of the previous ones, including Delta. There's no argument on anybody's part about that. When we first saw the data from the UK, that it was very clear that the ratio of hospitalizations to cases was lower. Interestingly, the duration of hospital stay was lower. The need for oxygen was lower. And when you're in a demographic situation like South Africa, where you have most of the people have gotten infected with prior variants, either the Delta or the Beta, that it was very likely a combination of perhaps the virus is inherently less virulent, or more likely there's an underlying degree of residual protection from prior infections of those who've been infected and survived. The data from the UK and particularly Scotland and England, two separate studies, really confirm that. They're seeing less of a severity in the form of manifestations by hospitalizations. The issue that we don't want to get complacent about, John, is that when you have such a high volume of new infections, it might override a real diminution in severity, so that if you have many, many, many more people with a less level of severity, that might kind of neutralize the positive effect of having less severity when you have so many more people. And we're particularly worried about those who are in that unvaccinated class, that, tens and tens of millions of Americans who are eligible for vaccination who've not been vaccinated. Those are the most vulnerable ones when you have a virus that is extraordinarily effective in getting to people and infecting them the way Omicron is. So even though we're pleased by the evidence from multiple countries that it looks like there is a lesser degree of severity, we've got to be careful that we don't get complacent about that. Because it might still lead to a lot of hospitalizations in the United States.
Right. So as an individual, your chance of having severe disease, needing to go to the hospital if you get infected with Omicron, might be less, because there are so many more. The hospitals could still be overrun. Let me.
That's the concern. That's the concern.
Let me ask you about something else from the president's interview with David. David asked about the lack of a vaccine requirement for air travel. There is no vaccine requirement for domestic air travel in the United States. And when the president was asked, should there be one, he said that his team has said it's not necessary at this point. Do you agree with that there shouldn't be a vaccine requirement for domestic air travel?
Well, it depends on what you want to use it for. I mean, vaccine requirements for people coming in from other countries is to prevent newly infected people from getting into the country. A vaccine requirement for a person getting on the plane is just another level of getting people to have a mechanism that would spur them to get vaccinated. Namely, you can't get on a plane unless you're vaccinated, which is just another one of the ways of getting requirements, whatever that might be. So, I mean, anything that could get people more vaccinated would be welcome. But with regard to the spread of virus in the country, I mean, I think if you look at wearing a mask and the filtration on planes, things are reasonably safe. We want to make sure people keep their masks on. I think the idea of taking masks off, in my mind, is really not something we should even be considering. But that's what we meant by it depends on what the goal of getting people vaccinated before they get on a domestic flight.
Yeah, yeah, and of course the airline CEOs were suggesting that you know that we may no longer need a mask. I hear you loud and clearly. You disagree with that on the airplane. Oh. You know, it was interesting on this question of vaccination. I'm sure you saw President Trump, former President Trump, came out and said that he had received the booster shot. He actually got booed a little bit by the crowd of his supporters as he said that. And now, you know, there's another interview he just did with a conservative outlet with Candace Owens, where he really pushed back on the idea that the vaccine is not protecting people. He said that the people going to hospitals are the ones largely that haven't been vaccinated. You don't die if you get the vaccine. Those were Donald Trump's words. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if his supporters listen to that.
Well, I certainly hope so, John. We'll take anything we can get about getting people vaccinated. I was a bit dismayed when former President Trump came out and made that statement and his followers booed him, which I was stunned by that. I mean, given the fact of how popular he is with that group, that they would boo him, which tells me how recalcitrant they are about being told what they should do. And I think that his continuing to say that people should get vaccinated and articulating that to them, in my mind, is a good thing. I hope he keeps it up. Yeah, let's hope he says it loudly and clearly. Hey, before you go, one question. Some news this week that a second antiviral pill, this one by Merck, has been approved for emergency use authorization by the FDA. This one not quite as effective as the Pfizer pill, which is 89% effective in preventing hospitalizations and death. Is this really the breakthrough that you've been waiting for? Do you think ultimately that our path out of this, I know the emphasis now is on vaccines, but that these antiviral treatments could be ultimately the real silver bullet? John, I agree with you that a highly effective, orally administered, and that's the critical issue. There are two things that are really encouraging about this approval of these, particularly the Pfizer product, which is about 90% effective in preventing you from getting to the hospital or dying compared to placebo. That's part of the comprehensive approach to this outbreak. Vaccines and boosters, masks, and now, very importantly, a highly effective therapy is really going to make a major, major difference. We've just got to make sure that there's the production of enough of that product that we can get it widely used for those who need it as quickly as possible. I assume that will be a top priority going forward, right? I mean, possibly including Defense Authorization Act, Production Authorization Act, and the like. Absolutely, John. Absolutely. We've got to get that product into the mouths of those who need it. Yep. All right, Dr. Fauci, thank you for joining us, and Merry Christmas. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.